now speak to an analyst from the SETA think tank. Omer Ozkizilcik is joining us live from Ankara. Mr. Ozkizilcik, thank you very much for joining us. Your initial thoughts then on the stages now that will proceed from the launching of Operation Spring Shield. What will be the first steps taken as this fight now begins?
So first of all, I think the operation has de facto already begun after the killing of the Turkish soldiers in the Jebel Zawiya region. So therefore, we see since then a huge Turkish drone strikes against the regime force in Idlib. And I think the main goal of the Turkish strikes is to decimate the operational capability of the Assad regime, to decimate their military capabilities, and to enable a pushback by the Syrian opposition. At the very moment, the Syrian opposition are been progressing in the Jebel Zawiya region. They are re-establishing, reinforcing the Sochi lines in the Gap plains already. And in the region of Sarakib, we see that Turkey has transformed this flat terrain into a kill zone. Every possible Syrian regime element is being targeted and killed and destroyed in this area. So if the operational speed continues for a day or for some days, I expect the Syrian opposition be able to push back the Assad regime on full front. However, the main issue here I'm worried about is about the future of the Assad regime itself. If the Assad regime is insisting on not withdrawing voluntarily from the Idlib line back to the Sochi line, then their casualties might be so big that the Assad regime would not be able to hold its ground in other areas of Syria. For instance, today there is also an ongoing clash between opposition cells and underground opposition structures in south of Syria, in Dara, and the Assad regime is not really able to confront them as all of their military gear is now in Idlib. If Assad is being decimated in the front lines, I expect in other areas of Syria a re-uprising by the Syrian opposition, as the Assad regime will not be able to tackle all of them. So therefore, here we have to see, is the Assad regime and Russia ready for a Sochi 2.0 agreement? If they are not, and the Operation Spring Shield continues, I expect that we will speak in some months about very difficult things we were speaking some months ago. So we will start to speak about a political transition process. We will start to speak about the toppling of the Assad regime. If the Assad regime does not withdraw voluntarily and Turkey and Russia does not agree on something which can work out for both sides.
And Omer, is there any likelihood that that will actually happen? There's been calls for the Syrian regime to move its forces back to those agreed de-escalation lines for years, for months, if not years now. Is there any chance, do you think, that that will actually happen in the coming days now that the Turkish army are fully engaged in this fight? And what chance is there that those talks that are planned between President Erdogan and President Putin next week will have some kind of resolution to this?
First of all, the Turkish army is not fully engaged yet. We see that the Turkish armed forces are operating drone strikes, artillery attacks against Assad regime, but there is not a full-fledged Turkish military assault yet on Idlib. So we see that there is also not a necessity for that, because if the Turkish army would launch a military operation on full scale, we would not speak about Idlib, we would speak about different areas of Syria, because the Turkish army is just too superior against the regime force here. And I think this is something the Russians know. And I have been argued for weeks, if not months, that the escalation superiority in Idlib is with the Turkish side, not with the Russian side. And therefore, I expect until the summit between President Erdogan and Putin, that the Syrian opposition will progress on the ground even more, and that Putin and Erdogan will try to come to a sort of an agreement. And I think here, for the first time since the Crimean crisis, there is an actor who teaches Russia that a military solution cannot be imposed against the will of another state. And here, Idlib might be the beginning of a real political solution in Syria, as the chance for a military solution will be demanded by the Turkish armed force.
And Omer, what do you see that potential political solution be? Many people, analysts like yourselves and journalists, have been wondering what that solution could end up being. If this does continue to be a fight for that region, and that region continues to be held by the Syrian opposition, Bashar al-Assad has said many, many times that he will not allow that to take place. Just lay out for us what you think there could be in terms of a political solution for the Idlib region.
So what we need is a de-escalation and the cessation of all hostilities, and this will be ensured by the Turkish armed force very soon, I think. And after that, if the Assad regime sees that it cannot impose its every inch policy by recapturing all of Syria by military means, I think the political process will be accelerated. And I think in the next period, the main focus will be terrorist organizations like the YPG and other radical groups such as the Shia militias and some extremist groups formerly affiliated with Al-Qaeda. And after that, I think the UN resolution will be implemented. So we will have a transitional government, we will have a new constitution and new elections. This is the only way out of this crisis for Syria. And the Constitutional Committee was working. It was almost paused due to the conflict in Idlib. I think this will be re-accelerated again. And in the political transition process, if the Assad regime loses for the first time since the beginning of the war, then the regime will be much more eager to accept political concessions. And here we have also to remind us that the economy of the Assad regime has been hardly attacked and weak due to the sanctions imposed by the Americans, and due to the weak economic situation in Lebanon, and due to the weak economic situation in Iran. So the Assad regime cannot maintain its political goals if it cannot achieve a rapid military victory in Idlib. So therefore, denying a military victory in Idlib will force the Assad regime to make some concessions in the political process. And I think the future of Syria will be decided by the Syrians themselves in the process of the Constitutional Committee and in hopefully new elections. However, we are not there yet. And this totally depends on how much Turkey will enforce a political solution by denying a military solution in Idlib.
And Omer, just wider on this then as well, what role does the international community have in this now that the operation is fully underway? There has been some discussion of a NATO response. There's been warm words, but nothing other than that. What role do you think the international community now has to play in this ongoing fight?
First of all, the international community should recognize how mislead the narrative over Syria was for years. So when the Syrian war broke out, the Obama administration was afraid of imposing a no-fly zone over Syria due to the air defense systems of the Assad regime. And now we see even basic Turkish drones can destroy these air defense systems. They are not much capable at all. So this is the first time in history that a Pantsir air defense system has been destroyed by a drone. So this totally indicates that all of the assessments in regards to the air defense capabilities of the Assad regime was wrong. And additionally, we see that the Russians were bluffing as well, because until today, there was no direct shutdown of a Turkish air vehicle over Idlib by the Russian air defense systems in Hmeimim air base. And I think the international community needs to see this. And they need to see that there can be a solution, peace for Syria, but this can only be ensured if the international community is ready to act in line with the responsibility to protect. So until now, it's only Turkey who is preventing a new Srebrenica, a new Rwanda in Idlib. But the international community, if they support Turkey by actual military means, and this can also be some symbolic aid, they do not need to be engaged in direct combat. Even some jets flying around the airspace of Idlib would be a clear message to the Russians and Assad regime to help to stop their military assault and to start the talks for a political transition process. And here, additionally, we have to think about more pressure against the Assad regime and more cooperation between the supporters of the Syrian opposition. If Turkey is being supported by diplomatic, financial, and political means, I think we will speak about a really rapid political transition process, which no one is imagining at the very moment. However, this totally depends on the readiness and capability of the international community to support Turkey. Supporting Turkey in the Syrian crisis means supporting peace and safety of civilians in Syria, which has been not done for 9 years. Now it's time, after 9 years, to use this momentum for the safety of civilians or for democracy in Syria.
Okay, Omer Ozkizilcik, just stay with us, please. I just want to bring in a bit of news that we've had come in from the Turkish Defense Ministry. The Defense Minister, Mr. Hulusi Akar, has spoken in the last few minutes. Let's just listen to what he had to say.
Operation Spring Shield was launched after the abhorrent attack that took place on February the 27th and is being carried out successfully. So far, 1 drone, 8 helicopters, 103 tanks, 72 cannon howitzers, multiple head rocket launchers, 3 air defense systems, and 2,212 regime soldiers have been neutralized. Our fire and activities continue through the sacrifice of our heroic soldiers. We are still negotiating with Russia. Our expectations from Russia at this stage is that they keep their promises as guarantor states and use their power to stop regime attacks and make them retreat to areas agreed under the Sochi deal.
Well, Omer Ozkizilcik, we heard there from Hulusi Akar, the Turkish Defense Minister, laying out just how vast the Turkish military might is that it's at play right now. And you mentioned earlier that the operation, although it has begun, has not really reached its full pitch currently. Just where is that operation at this precise moment, as you understand it?
So the operation is in its very early steps. So at the very moment, the Turkish armed force is mainly focusing on decimating the regime's capabilities, because since the February 27 attack on Turk soldiers, the regime was not able to capture one more village. So the offensive capabilities of the Assad regime is being ended at the very moment. And for the first time since 9 years, the Assad regime force militias on the ground are trying to hide their tanks, armored vehicles, and their soldiers due to the airstrikes by the Turkish drones. However, as I said, if the Assad regime does not withdraw, only by continuing this amount and the speed of Turkish strikes against Assad regime and the attacks by the Syrian opposition on the ground, we will see a total decimation of the Assad regime. And I think the best the Assad regime could do at the very moment is to withdraw back to the Sochi lines. However, there's also some speak by the regime supporters about attacking the Turkish observation points in Idlib and the Turkish soldiers surrounded by the regime forces. If such a thing happens, I have to repeat myself, the escalation superiority is with the Turkish armed force. Then I think Turkish F-16 fighter jets will enter, and the Assad regime will be faced with such a devastating military assault that they will be pushed back to the Sochi line in a day. Or 2 days. So it will be totally annihilating for the regime if they try to escalate any further. And this has been proven by the Turkish armed force. So the regime is now facing an option. Either they will try to sustain their position, which can result in a total collapse of the regime military capabilities, or they will withdraw voluntarily, or they will try to reach a new agreement brokered by the Russians. And here, I personally do not think that the Russians will risk a direct confrontation with Turkey, but Turkey is quite ready and capable to risk direct confrontations with the Russians. This is the difference, and this is the superiority of the Turkish side in this conflict. And the Turkish army is just too mighty for the regime force, and the Syrian opposition on the ground has not also accelerated its full might as well. So there are thousands of Syrian National Army fighters waiting in the Afrin and Euphrates Shield region just to go to launch a military operation against Assad regime. And we have heard that many Syrians in the camps of Idlib, of northern Syria, many Syrian refugees inside Turkey are now contacting the Syrian opposition groups to join them, to fight against Assad regime, because after 9 years, there is a real hope to defeat the Assad regime on the opposition side. And this moral superiority and motivational superiority of the Syrian opposition force will have its real effect on the ground. At the very moment, the regime supporters and the regime militias are very much frustrated, and they do not have the moral capability and the moral readiness to confront the Syrian opposition and the Turkish armed force. And they will be withdrawn back to the Sochi lines, either this way or the other way. But this has to be accepted first. So at the very moment, the regime is still denying the realities and trying to maintain morale, but this won't work for some more days.
Okay, Omer Ozkizilcik from the SETA Foundation, thank you very much for that analysis.